Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday morning. I'm Aaron Maté. Katie Halper is away this week, so we have for you a very special co-host. He is the co-author of the best-selling book, The Myth of Normal, the co-host of the very funny and very surging podcast. It's surging up the podcast charts, Bad Hasbara. And last but not least, he's also my brother, Daniel Maté. Let's bring him in. Hello, Daniel.
What's up, Aaron?
Good Monday morning.
Good Monday morning to you. I've assembled a collection of LPs in your honor. Some of your favorite albums here.
Okay, yeah, sure. Live in Color. Ice-T, Original Gangster.
And
recently celebrated his anniversary, yes. And Marvin, What's Going On Live. Very nice. Very nice. Very nice. Well, unfortunately for the fans, we're not going to be hearing from any of those genius artists today. We'll be hearing from corporate media hacks. And the people in power they serve. But very grateful to you for joining us, Daniel, filling in for Katie, who is on vacation and will be back next week.
I'm very honored to be here. And thanks to the Useful Idiots crew for having me. And Katie, I promise to harangue the public about smashing that like as often as I can.
You've been sending me suggested jokes for Useful Idiots for a long time. So this is your chance to actually apply your writing skills to a live audience.
I mean, I think that makes me a Monday morning quarterback, but the difference is it's actually the game is happening live on Monday morning, so it's not it's not the usual meaning.
All right, let's get into it. Starting off as always with our weekly recap from Meet the Press.
Sunday morning, President Biden is in an all-out effort to revive his candidacy after that debate performance last week that raised questions about whether he's capable of beating Donald Trump and serving another 4 years in office. One veteran House Democrat.
Question: how about serving right now?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Concerns about whether he's fit to serve the last 4 years in office that he's served.
Yeah. How about the time in between now and the next 4 years?
Because, well, there's that too, right?
Yeah. If you can't perform, if you can't put a sentence together on the debate stage, and if he's incoherent now, maybe he should not be presiding over the world's top nuclear arsenal and a country that is currently fueling two disastrous military conflicts. Just a thought.
Yeah, and as Felix Biederman says, you know, the famous thing with dementia is that one thing that really helps it is the passage of time, you know. By the way, I have to ask this about Kristen Welker. How many hours or days do you think she had to spend with Chuck Todd before he was willing to hand the reins over to her, training her how to say good Sunday morning and like the cadence of the opening, you know, the sort of concerned cadence of the opening monologue. She really does sound a bit like him, you know.
That's so sad.
And I just imagine him being like, no, that's not it. And talking to the producer, I'm not leaving this program until she gets it. God damn it. I built this brand.
Tells NBC News, opinions are hardening in many quarters that action has to be taken. And that action is a different nominee. Both House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Virginia Senator Mark Warner are convening groups of their colleagues to discuss the path forward. And a growing number of congressional Democrats have called on President Biden to step aside.
Mr. President, please look at what's happened. Recognize that the reality out there may not be the same thing you're hearing from the circle of your closest friends and family. And consider putting our country first.
The campaign has been very, arrogant in their response.
Sorry. That was a really funny subtweet of Jill Biden.
Yeah.
Of Lady Macbeth. That was a really fun, that was a way of saying your wife means you harm and it's going to kill this party. Don't listen to her. Don't listen to your crackhead son. Listen to me, Lloyd Doggett, the senator, or is he a senator or
he's a Congress member? Yeah.
Congress member that no one's ever heard of.
We want to know what their plan is to win this election and turn these numbers around. And if they don't have a plan, then I think we have to move in a different direction.
It's like talking to a loved one about such a tough situation. How do you tell that person he can't do this anymore?
The decision.
I'll tell you how you tell him. In the case of someone like Joe Biden, you tell him with a little puppet show.
Mm.
You pull up very close to his bed, and you pull out your little sock puppets, and you speak very softly, like you would to a slow child.
The problem is Joe Biden has said, and I think we're going to see the clip, only the Lord Almighty
Mm-hmm.
can convince him not to run. He said, if the Lord Almighty comes down, then I'll drop it. It tells me not to run, then I'll drop out. But otherwise, he's staying in the race. So really, I think what you have to do is simulate some sort of God moment where, get like an elaborate production crew, really pretend as if the Lord is beaming down in front of Joe Biden to tell him, Joe, drop out. Otherwise,
you and I need to make a Tupac parody video called Only God Can Nudge Me.
that's pretty good.
Or Only God Can Budge Me. Which one?
That's pretty good. That's
Yeah.
pretty good. If you're a Tupac fan, you'll get that.
Yeah.
About whether Mr. Biden stays in the race may come down to raw data. In a new Wall Street Journal poll, former President Trump has opened up a 6-point lead over President Biden among registered voters, the widest gap in that survey since 2021. Mr. Trump.
I mean, think about that. I mean, because Biden can't function, we lose sight of the fact that Donald Trump is a horrible candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. I mean, he can't. His only selling point to beyond like the party base and people who worship him is that he was going to drain the swamp. That did convince enough people in 2016, and it wasn't a hard case because he was running against like the consummate swamp creature, Hillary Clinton. He was going to drain the swamp. He was going to fight the deep state. He was going to fight the establishment. He was anti-military intervention. That was the con he pulled in 2016. And for a lot of people, it wasn't a hard sell because the alternative was Hillary Clinton. But he can't do that anymore because he spent 4 years in the Oval Office. And what was his only accomplishment? Basically, it was a tax heist that transferred more wealth to his wealthy friends.
And that's not even counting his foreign policy accomplishments, despite his promises to, not to end the wars. And he didn't get U.S. into any new ones, but he did, appoint people like John Bolton, and he ripped up nuclear arms treaties. But I think, you might be underestimating his selling points. Those are his only policy selling points. But he has I think a much more salient selling point, which is that he's entertaining. And he still got it. Like you saw his performance in that debate.
Mm-hmm.
He said some really noxious things, including using Palestinian as a slur. But he's able to deliver it with a kind of comic cadence and a television-ready charisma, for lack of a better word, that to the people he's trying to sell it on and to people who are sick enough of the Democratic elite, is going to do at least as much as any policy promises, if not more.
Well, and again, because Biden is incoherent and
That's
because his policies are, especially on foreign policy, disastrous.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really, Trump doesn't have to do very much. He has to sound coherent. And you're right. If he can be funny a couple of times, be entertaining, that will be enough, I think, to sway independent voters, because what's the alternative?
That's right.
Really out of it.
That's right. And Biden tries to match him in terms of bluster, but it's completely unconvincing. It's totally earnest. It's just terminally, not even boomer. It's like terminally greatest generation tough guy talk. Most of the slang is from, I don't know, the 1950s. And it just sounds like lame grandpa shit.
So the kids aren't saying dog face pony soldier is what you're saying. Yeah.
I haven't heard it. I've heard pony face dog soldier, but he's not as hip as that. He's not up on the new street slang.
Leads by nearly 9 points among registered voters in a New York Times Siena College poll. He's up by 6 points among likely voters, his largest lead since 2015. And Vice President Harris performs slightly better in a CNN poll within the margin of error. But a Bloomberg Morning Consult poll shows a close race in key battleground states. Now, an increasing number of big Democratic donors are calling on President Biden to drop out.
The lifeblood to a campaign in politics, the lifeblood is money. I talked to a bunch of big donors, and they're moving all their money to Congress and the Senate. I cannot believe we're in this situation.
That's Ari Emanuel. For people who are just listening, that's Ari Emanuel, Hollywood super agent, slapping his knees in frustration. But I do love the admission.
Yeah.
The lifeblood of a campaign is money. So it's only when the donors realize that the figurehead at the top of the ticket is incoherent and just unsuitable for the task that they admit the truth, which is that the lifeblood of the campaign is not the grassroots, it's not policies, it's not organizing people around issues that impact their lives. It's money. And Ari Emanuel admits it because right now the money is not getting what it invests in. So they want somebody else.
Yeah. Two things about that clip that I love. It's one of them is that, although I'm sorry that they did that quick cut, that edit, because what people didn't see is that after he said the lifeblood of any campaign, the lifeblood is money, he continued to say money, cash, Skrilla, dough, cheese, cheddar, ducats, cream. And it was really awesome. He just listed all these slang words for money. But also when he slapped his knee, his cool totally broke. He's like, he's, you know, just straight ahead. The lifeblood is money. And it kills me that, you know, this kid having a tantrum, like, and they're ruining our money. I hear that Abigail Disney is like pulling funding.
Oh, yeah. Stuff. Yeah. For the first time in his life, Joe Biden can say that he's, you know, sort of an insurgent candidate against the party elite, because he's so terrible that even after he served them his whole career, they're now revolting against them because he's incoherent and out of touch. It's pretty extraordinary. I love that they've turned even Joe Biden into like a Bernie Sanders type insurgent figure. I mean, they were having the same meltdown about Bernie Sanders in 2016 when he was challenging Hillary Clinton. now it's Joe Biden's turn.
Well, the problem is, what do you think the prospects of Biden being able to amass a vault of small money donations from ordinary people is?
Not likely.
An insurgent needs that.
Not likely.
Yeah.
But the president has been defiant. He is not dropping out. On the trail in Wisconsin and in an exclusive interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, President Biden insisted only the Lord Almighty could make him change his mind.
If the Lord Almighty came down and said, Joe, get out of the race, I'll get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
How do you know?
The Lord Almighty's not going to come down. But if you are told.
I love this journalistic rigor from George Stephanopoulos. Watch this.
The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
I agree that the Lord Almighty's not going to come down. But if
I agree, sir, the Lord Almighty is not going to come down. That's an important fact assertion from George Stephanopoulos. The Lord Almighty is not going to come down. Yes.
You make a strong point, sir. That's inarguable. But I want to say, how do you know the Lord Almighty hasn't come down? God speaks in signs and riddles. He speaks in mysteries. Okay, haven't you read your scripture? So how do you know that like, I don't know, Rottweiler barking at you as your limousine drove past wasn't the Lord Almighty? How do you know that you know, the Coke machine in the Oval Office, you know, the soda machine eating your dollar, that wasn't the Lord Almighty trying to send you a sign, man?
Well, look, I'm going to emulate George Stephanopoulos here. And as a journalist, I cannot confirm whether or not the Lord Almighty watches Useful Idiots. I don't know. I just don't know. But if the Lord Almighty is watching Useful Idiots, maybe he or she can show up for Joe Biden in a more forceful way, because maybe he's not picking up your signs. If you have indeed given them, which again, I also cannot confirm.
This would be a good time, in addition to you guys smashing that like button. Wilson, how many likes do we have? I've learned by watching this show. I don't know. But in addition to smashing the like button, if one of you wants to change your screen name to Lord Almighty, you could really blow this podcast's mind, you know?
I'm seeing 647 right now, but God, if you're watching, could you share on Twitter as well? I think that'd help.
Let's give a like also, you know, and thank you to all the people in the chat who suggested. I should have thought of this earlier. This is not only Monday morning, it's Maté morning.
Yes.
And we're happy to have you with us. Okay, let's get through this clip.
If you are told reliably from your allies, from your friends and supporters in the Democratic Party, in the House and the Senate, that they're concerned you're going to lose the House and the Senate if you stay in, what will you do?
I'm not going to answer that question. It's not going to happen.
But the
look on his face, well, that question. Yeah.
Well, I'm surprised too. There was a lot of talk about how his mouth is just open the whole time, the whole debate with Trump. And I'm surprised he must have been coached on that by his aides. Like, Mr. President, close the mouth. But he obviously hasn't mastered that yet. It will maybe take a little while longer. Maybe in his next term, he can get that.
He's a literal mouth breather at this point.
Interview
It
did not
really is
calm the widespread.
Oh, sorry.
Go
It
ahead.
really is something, by the way, to watch comparison videos of him in 2020, even to now. I mean, the guy could speak. Say what you like about Joe Biden. He is the pathological liar he accuses Trump of being and has been for decades. He's a war hawk and a war pig and an Israel simp and all this stuff. But the guy could deliver a speech. And to have that faculty robbed of him is a real indignity, I think.
Yeah, and it's hard, it's hard to someone who has empathy. He is someone who's committed who's fueled unspeakable suffering, especially in Gaza, but throughout his whole career. His policies have destroyed entire countries
and entire communities domestically.
Of course, yeah, but still, if you have empathy, everyone is a human being, and we're watching elder abuse. It's and of course, the same people who have no empathy for the Palestinians that are being slaughtered with their support every single day, obviously, don't care that this elderly man is being humiliated and being put into a situation he should not be in.
Well, they care about their own bottom line. That's it.
Exactly.
Panic throughout the party. Former Obama senior advisor David Axelrod said President Biden is rightfully proud of his record, but is, quote, dangerously out of touch with the concerns people have about his capacities. Some Democrats have also expressed frustration that the president refused to commit to taking a cognitive test.
Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent?
No, mommy said I didn't have to. Mommy said I didn't have to do my homework. She said I worked hard last week.
And I answered every question at the debate, which is what Jill told him after his disastrous appearance with Trump.
You answered every question, Joe.
Yeah. So listen, he just said, no, I've not taken a test. And then watch what happens next.
Medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and released the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do.
The answer right now is no, you don't want to do that right now.
No, I've already done it.
Okay. So no, I've not taken a test. And then a short while later, will you do a test? No, I've already done it. So the talking point doesn't even make sense because he's acknowledging he doesn't have a test, but then he says that I've already done a test.
Well, what he's trying to say is that my job provides daily tests. Like, look at me being president. But that's a Trump answer.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. Sitting there and having your aides tell you what to do and say, and literally, it just came out that when he does a public speech, his aides deliver like notes for him that show him with photographs how he should walk up to the podium. So like there's a shot of like the ground and then the podium, and they instruct him like, then you stand at the podium. Okay, so doing what your aides instruct you to do, including walking up to a podium, is not a cognitive test. And we're actually going to hear his answer shortly. What he said is his daily test every day as president. It's very revealing.
I have to say, within the limited, and I mean very limited bounds of Western journalism, George Stephanopoulos does a not bad job here, in terms of what his job was here, which was to press the president on this particular point. There's a number of moments where I think a lesser figure, but of course he's getting, it's well within the bounds of his job as a Democratic Party hack as well, because at least half the party wants Biden gone. So it's not that impressive.
On Monday, the Supreme Court gave former President Donald Trump a monumental legal victory, granting him sweeping immunity from prosecution over official actions in an extraordinary expansion of executive power. Aiming to capitalize on that, the Biden campaign is now arguing the decision is added proof that Mr. Trump will be more dangerous in a second term.
If you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
As long as he did the goodest job as he knows he can do.
Well, that's a very controversial interpretation now, because the Biden campaign is insistent he did not say the goodest job. He said the good as job.
Oh, the good as job, yeah.
And they've been emailing reporters and telling them not to say that Biden said goodest, and they got ABC
better.
News.
Oh, it's so much better.
Yeah,
so much better, because at least then you could say he transposed job and good. He said, I do the job as good as I can do.
Exactly.
So he's not making up words. He's just reversing words. Now, this Supreme Court thing, we don't need to get into the details, but Glenn Greenwald had a really interesting episode of System Update, just blowing this notion that it's this radical expansion of executive power that every Democrat is whining about. That, in fact, it's been the prevailing ethos in Washington for years that you don't prosecute sitting presidents for crimes they commit while they're in office. And then to see the Biden campaign double down on their one and only tactic, a completely lame one, which is fear mongering about look at the other guy, it's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, well, again, as the person who did a lot to debunk the whole thing known as Russiagate, the whole thing where the president was framed as a Russian agent in an act of collusion between the Democratic Party leadership and the intelligence agencies and the DOJ. You will not hear from me much sympathy for Democrats' case that Trump is like usurping the rule of law and is targeting political enemies and is a monarch, when really they tried to undermine a president by framing him as an asset of Vladimir Putin, who was being blackmailed, and that consumed a lot of his presidency and, worse, fueled disastrous policies around the world, especially in Ukraine, by encouraging militarism and a neocon agenda, the same neocon agenda of those who pushed the whole Russiagate thing. So you will not hear me be very sympathetic with that argument from Democrats.
Well, you will not hear me complain about it. You know why? Because it won my brother some goddamn journalism awards. Well deserved.
All right. Well, listen, let's turn to more of Biden's interview with George Stephanopoulos, because we just heard him say, I have a cognitive test every single day as president in all my duties. So let's hear what Biden said in making his case for what he's doing in the presidency and how that is a cognitive test for him every single day.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do. Not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world.
So not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world. And note that Meet the Press, when they played this clip, they cut that. But this is one of Biden's most unhinged, but also most honest statements, in that he really thinks that he's running the world because he's the president of the U.S. And that's also how he defines himself. And if you note that whenever he's asked to, prove his worth, to prove his staying power, to prove his abilities, he always defaults to this hegemonic view of the world. He's taking on Russia and he's running the world, because that's how he really fundamentally defines himself.
I actually don't think it's an imperialist statement. I just think you heard that interview where he said he's the first Black woman to serve.
Yes.
So he's transposing that and applying the Beyonce song, Who Runs the World, Girls. So,
I did not think of it that way. There we go. Okay.
You got to see, you got to be generous. Like, give the most charitable interpretation.
So he's really making, so I thought he's making a hegemonic statement. You're saying he's really making a Black feminist statement.
He's in the Bayhive,
Yeah. Based on a bit of a false premise that he's a Black woman. Okay. So that's obviously not quite.
That's right. And he's not citing his sources. Like, he's not giving, he's not.
Yeah, take credit. Yeah.
That's not how it sounds, like hyperbole.
I guess I'm.
So that sounds like hyperbole. Yeah, it is hyperbole in the sense that, the world didn't elect you president, but it's accurate in the sense that this is what a president really sees their role as, running
That's
the
right.
world.
That's right.
And that's what he's there to do. And that's what guides him. And it's guided him his whole career. And that's why the world's in such chaos, is because people like him give themselves the right to run it, rather than let people just live their own lives and let states be independent of U.S. control. Okay, so more of Joe Biden, how he sees himself and what his job is as president, why he's really proven his cognitive abilities. In the next clip.
2020. Wouldn't a clear-eyed political calculus tell you that it's going to be much tougher to win in 2024?
Not when you're running against a pathological liar. Not when he hadn't been challenged in a way that he's about to be challenged. Not when people...
You've had months to challenge him.
Oh, I sure had months, but I was also doing a hell of a lot of other things, like wars around the world, like keeping...
I was doing a hell of a lot of other things, like wars around the world. That is Joe Biden explaining why he hasn't sufficiently challenged Trump and exposed Trump, because he's busy doing wars around the world. Another honest statement from Joe Biden.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, Biden is starting to tell the truth, right? Which means he's a reformed pathological liar. I mean, Biden was lying on the political scene before presidency was a twinkle in Trump's eye. I mean, look back at the plagiarized speeches in the 80s and the talk about being the top of his class. I mean, you want to talk about pathological.
Let's hear that clip just one more time, because it's so amazing. It's just a shorter fragment.
Not when he hadn't been challenged in a way that he's about to be challenged. Not when people...
You've had months to challenge him.
Oh, I sure had months, but I was also doing a hell of a lot of other things, like wars around the world, like keeping NATO together.
Wars around the world. Wars around the world. I love it.
Yeah, wars around the world. And cue up Daft Punk around the world. I also like that he sort of associates in one sentence wars around the world with keeping NATO together, because that's what that means.
Right. Well, let's hear actually more of this, because again, it just shows how he conceives of himself and just how his whole identity as a president. Notwithstanding, Daniel, your fair point about how he sees himself as a black woman, how his conception of himself as a president.
And who are we to tell him? I mean, if that's how he identifies, go with it.
So let's hear more of Biden.
Elections are about the future, not the past. They're about tomorrow, not yesterday. And the question on so many people's minds right now is, can you serve effectively for the next 4 years?
George, I'm the guy that put NATO together, the future. No one thought I could expand it. I'm the guy that shoved Putin down. No one thought could happen.
No one could thought it.
I'm pretty sure Truman. Sorry, go ahead.
No one thought it could happen because you didn't shut Putin down. What are you talking about?
That's right.
What are you talking about? He invaded Ukraine. Russia now controls 1/5 of it. They're winning the war.
Their economy has never been better.
Their economy is doing very well. Their oil revenues are up. The whole point of Joe Biden's Russia policy was to reduce the ruble to rubble. He hasn't done that. So what is he? And then he talks about, I put NATO together. And Daniel, you were saying about that.
Well, I thought Truman put NATO together.
Well, yeah, and many other heads of state. And so what he's talking about Biden there, he added 2 members, Sweden and Finland. Okay. This is like your signature accomplishment that you're going to try to sell to the American people. You added Sweden and Finland to NATO. Does anybody care? Does it improve anyone's security? If anything, it endangers more people's security, but that's another story. But
sounds like a real scam-denavia.
And he goes on, and then he goes on to talk about how he also got Japan to spend more on their military budget. Again,
that's great.
Yeah, if you're a contractor in the DC, Virginia area, that's or a lobbyist, great thing. Mm-hmm. Everybody else, I don't see how it benefits your life if Japan spends more money on their military. But that's where Joe
stop
Biden's
being such a right-wing populist.
All right, let's turn to how the Democratic leadership and the punditry are handling Joe Biden's shambolic debate. First up,
Did
Adam
you just
Schiff.
heard
We haven't heard-
the word? Did you use the word shambolic? I've never
Yeah.
used that word before.
No? Okay. Adam Schiff, we haven't seen him in a while in Useful Idiots, but here he is. Voice of reason in the party, the guy who claimed to have seen secret evidence of Trump-Russia collusion and made sure that Democrats were focused all their energies on pursuing a conspiracy theory that Trump was being compromised by Putin.
Mhm.
Didn't work out very well, but for some reason, people still treat him as a serious voice. So here he is weighing in.
From what you saw, do you think he is still the strongest candidate to beat former President Trump?
Well, ultimately, this is a decision President Biden is going to have to make, and President Biden alone. But I would say this, he has been an extraordinary president. He has created millions and millions of jobs. He has expanded and strengthened our NATO alliances. He has brought back manufacturing in this country. He has brought about the most aggressive attack on climate change. He has done more in one term than most presidents ever do, no matter how many terms they get. And he's running against someone who's a pathological liar, someone who...
Again, if you're going to bring out the talking point that Biden's running against a pathological liar, you should not be using the guy who claimed to have seen secret evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, which he just couldn't tell the public yet because it was secret, but he promised that it was there.
Not to mention claims to have seen photographs of beheaded babies.
Well, that's Biden. Yes. Biden claimed to have seen Biden obviously is a career pathological liar.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. One of his biggest lies and most damaging lies is he said on multiple occasions that he's seen photos of beheaded babies that do not in fact exist. And the White House even had to acknowledge that once, although quietly. But Adam Schiff,
right, you're talking about
also is not well placed to weigh in on lying because again, he more than anybody else in the Democratic Party pushed the collusion scam for years and claimed to have seen secret evidence of it that didn't in fact exist.
Well, I think what Schiff is doing is undermining Biden over there, so he doesn't have to undermine him over here.
If you watch this show,
that's a deep cut.
That's a deep cut. Yeah, it's a deep cut.
Ran the country into the ground by his mishandling of a deadly pandemic. Someone who is a pathological, not only a pathological liar, but is immoral, indecent, unfit for office.
Repeated himself.
But the performance on the debate stage, I think, rightfully raised questions among the American people about whether the president has the vigor to defeat Donald Trump. And this is an existential race. Given Joe Biden's incredible record, given Donald Trump's terrible record, he should be mopping the floor with Donald Trump. Joe Biden is running against a criminal. It should not be even close, and there's only one reason.
The criminal is running against a criminal. That's really what he's saying.
Yeah,
that's really what he's saying. A criminal is running against another criminal.
It is close, and that's the president's age. And what I would...
Let's go back and hear that again, because this is Adam Schiff now doing some whitewashing.
The reason it is close, and that's the president's age. And
so he's saying the only reason it is close is because of the president's age. It's not because of his age. It's because of his declining cognitive abilities at that age, which not everybody has.
And it was close before these concerns about his cognitive abilities came up. And why was it close? Because, you know, Americans on the whole aren't overwhelmingly thrilled with how their lives are doing, 3.5 years later into a Biden presidency.
Exactly. Which will never be something that Adam Schiff and other members of the Democratic Party neoliberal elite will ever take responsibility for.
That's right.
So the fakery of this discussion is now they have to acknowledge some problems with Biden, but of course they can't be fully honest about his actual record, which is pretty terrible. I mean, again, I don't want to minimize how bad Trump's record is and how bad his policies are. Democrats domestically do offer more for people, I think, than Republicans do, who are just like ultra subservient to the elite, as opposed to Democrats who are just, they're also ultra subservient, but Democrats are slightly less subservient.
And they're subservient to a section of the elite that has some charitable sort of social conscience aesthetics. at the very least. You know, it's incredible when these people talk how literally every clause of every sentence is false. It reminds me of something that our dad often says, a Hungarian expression, when something is so false that not even the opposite is true.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Okay. Let's hear more from Schiff, including the answer that concerned him most from Biden's interview with George Stephanopoulos.
All right.
When I talked to Democrats, one of the exchanges that frustrated the most from that interview on Friday was when he was asked what happens if you lose. President Biden said it's about whether he gave it his all. Is that what it's about? Is that answer satisfying to you?
No, that is the answer that most concerned me as well. This is not just about whether he gave it the best college try, but rather whether he made the right decision to run or to pass the torch. That is the most important decision for him to make right now. This is about whether this country remains a democracy, whether we veer off into some kind of pseudo dictatorship. Everything is riding on this, and I know people feel an urgency. I feel an urgency, but I would tell the president, slow down and take the time to make the right decision here. That's best for the country, and I believe he will.
So this talking point about if we don't elect a Democrat, we're going to veer into a dictatorship. I don't think it's going to fly. Trump had 4 years in office. He didn't become a dictator. A 3-hour riot on Capitol Hill notwithstanding. And again, because Democrats don't want to commit themselves to policies that really materially benefit people, they can't run on that. So you could say, if you were trying to make an honest case against Trump, is like this guy serves the ultra elite, and talk about his tax cuts. But Democrats share a lot of those policies, so they can't, and they're scared of of being called the socialist like Bernie Sanders is. So they can't go there. So therefore, they have to turn this into this like fantasy world. If we don't vote for Trump, we're going to turn into a dictatorship. And just like I don't think Trump can claim he'll drain the swamp anymore,
right?
Because he certainly didn't. I don't think Democrats, after 4 years of Trump, where he didn't become a dictator, can claim seriously, unless you're a diehard MSNBC viewer, that we're going to turn into a new fascist Germany or Italy if we allow Trump to take office.
Yeah, that's right. And two other things. Number one, I'm not sure telling Joe Biden to slow down is sage advice. You know, the guy's pretty slow as it is. I think what he needs in his life is more amphetamines, not more sedatives. And the other thing is this concern, you know, even if your concern is January 6th, well, look, why did January 6th happen? Because Trump lost. So elect the guy, and there's not going to be any more January 6th. He's not going to tell people to storm the Capitol. He's going to tell people to have picnics.
Okay, we're going to skip ahead because we're running short on time. Let's go to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, who ran against Biden in the primary in 2020, was doing not bad until the rest of the Democratic Party colluded against him and undermined him. And it didn't help his case that Sanders was hesitant to really criticize Joe Biden and call him out as corrupt and call him out on his worst policies. But
they're good friends. Come on.
They're good friends. Anyway, but now Bernie Sanders, you know, this could be his moment, right? The party leadership is in a panic about Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders still has a lot of followers, people who listen to him, take him seriously. So how is he using this moment to push his agenda of, you know, helping out the many, not the few? Well, let's see what he does on Face the Nation.
Leading voice on the left in this country. Does President Biden now have your full support?
President Biden can clearly defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in the history of this country. And the choice is quite clear. You got in Trump somebody who wants to take away a woman's right to control her body, who thinks that climate change is a hoax, and who has turned his back on the working class of this country. And on the other side, you have Joe Biden, first president in American history to walk a picket line. We have put more money into fighting climate change than any time in the history of this country. We're rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. But this I do want to say, and where I am.
So look what Bernie has to go with when he's trying to promote Biden's record. Okay, he's the first president to walk a picket line. Yes, Biden did do that. a performative gesture in an election year to appeal to working class voters. I mean, it's still significant he did that. It's worth acknowledging, but it's pretty thin gruel, right? Can Bernie say any policies that Biden did for working people? No, he can just talk about a photo op that he did. So, for example, in policy-wise, Biden broke the rail strike.
There you go.
And Bernie, so therefore, can only pivot to a photo op that Biden did to cover up for things like that.
Yeah.
I'm critical of the Biden campaign. It's one thing to talk about your record over the last 3.5 years, which is a strong record, but the American people are hurting. 60% of our people live in paycheck to paycheck. 25% of elderly people are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less. The American people want an agenda for the next 4 years that speaks to the needs of the working class of this country. And frankly, I don't think the president has brought that agenda forward. He has got to say, I am prepared to take on corporate greed, massive income and wealth inequality, and stand with the working class of this country. He does that, he's going to win and win big.
So that
Bernie.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing to, in one breath, say he's got a very strong record for the last 3.5 years. It's a very strong record. And the American people are hurting. And 60% of people are living in poverty, and people are miserable, and they're looking for relief from their current status quo under the current regime. I mean, what are you doing?
Exactly. He wants it both ways. He wants to raise the issues that he's been fighting for his whole career, and good for him. But he doesn't want to hold Biden to account fully for not actually pursuing that same agenda in the interest of working people.
Yeah.
So he's in a tough spot, and he could apply his critique of Biden's campaign to himself. It's one thing to criticize or to note that Biden fully hasn't been there for working people, but why not actually use your leverage, use your power? Bernie has a movement, or he did have a movement, our revolution. Why not mobilize them? I understand Bernie's elderly as well, and it takes a lot of energy to be a movement leader, and there's a lot on his shoulders, but he has choices too. I think he could use his influence a lot more proactively than just urging Biden on corporate TV to change course, which Bernie's been doing for a long time, and Biden hasn't exactly listened.
Yeah, it's more like our de-evolution. It's not quite Galloway talking about Hitchens being a butterfly who turned back into a slug, but it is a regression in terms of, the force and integrity and believability of his rhetoric.
Yeah.
Sanders.
Yeah, and speaking of George Galloway, Jeremy Corbyn, compare Bernie Sanders to Jeremy Corbyn.
That's right.
Jeremy Corbyn, calls out the Labor Party leadership much more forcefully than Bernie calls out the Democratic Party leadership, and Corbyn got expelled over it. They kicked Corbyn out of Labor, but Corbyn, by the way, in a rare show of positivity for the world, Corbyn was just reelected as an independent in the British elections, which is a wonderful thing.
Unfortunately, Galloway was unseated. Yeah, but not by a lot. And of course, Galloway has an entire media apparatus that hates his guts. And for example, a major London paper, I think it was the Telegraph, the headline was on Galloway's loss, "A triumph for Israel." Mm-hmm.
Just outright saying it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's hear more from Bernie.
Politically, can he count on you to be on the campaign trail for him this summer and fall? Can he count on your support?
I've already done 6 events in Wisconsin. We've been to New York. I've been to Ohio.
What more do you want from me?
Let me say this, and maybe the most important point, Bob, I want to make this morning. What we are talking about now is not a Grammy Award contest for Best Singer. Biden is old. He's not as articulate as he once was. I wish he could jump up the steps on Air Force One. He can't. What we have got to focus on is policy. Whose policies have and will benefit the vast majority of the people in this country? Who has the guts to take on corporate America? Who is talking about expanding Medicare so we cover dental, hearing, and vision?
He's talking about beating Medicare.
Raising the...
Yeah, I mean, is Biden talking about that?
No.
When he tried to deliver his talking point about beating big pharma, he couldn't even get it out because he said we beat Medicare.
No,
but
he told
regardless, like whether or not Biden can read his lines or not, are his lines geared towards expanding Medicare? Is he really trying to pursue that? Is he using political capital to push that agenda? I haven't seen it.
No.
Certainly, whatever his policy is on Medicare, it's better than Republicans, which is basically to gut Medicare. That's for sure.
Yeah. Bernie's like in an abusive relationship, just, protecting the person who keeps lying to him and betraying him. He's like Lady Gaga in A Star Is Born. A few things. He says he's old. Well, first of all, he's younger than you, Bernie, and you're much more cogent. Yes. Number two, he can't jump up the stairs or leap up the stairs of Air Force One. Well, on the plus side, he can fall up the stairs on Air Force One. And as far as it not being a Grammy contest for the best singer, of course it's not. If it was, we'd be electing Anthony Blinken.
Oh, that would be terrible to hear Anthony Blinken sing again. Okay, well, all this raises the question, Bernie, you have more vigor, a lot more vigor than Joe Biden, as Daniel, you just pointed out. Bernie, you have followers. You galvanized the movement in 2016. You did it again in 2020. Will you consider running if Biden is replaced? And let's hear what Bernie says.
Sanders, I must ask, I covered you closely in 2016 and 2020. You've run national campaigns. You've been a presidential candidate. You know what it takes. If for whatever reason President Biden ever decided to withdraw from the race, would you be open to being considered as the nominee?
Well, right now I am running for re-election to the great state of Vermont as their senator. That's where my focus is right now.
Well, it's a nice thought, and it could be a moment for Bernie to seize. And, if he didn't want to run again, fine. But at least he could be, Biden is weak right now. Biden needs people like Bernie Sanders.
Yep.
And Bernie, if he wanted to, could seize that moment to, get Biden to commit to his top priorities, to actually do the things that he just said Biden should do. He doesn't just have to give Biden his support like he did in 2020 after he dropped out. He could actually demand something.
Unfortunately, Democrats have a leverage allergy.
All right, let's turn to Lindsey Graham. And Lindsey Graham, ironically, is one of the few people raising the issues that, that those of us on the left have raised. It's like, is Biden fit not just to run against Trump in an election months from now, or to serve out another 4 years in office, but is he fit right now to serve as commander-in-chief of one of the world's two top nuclear arsenals? And Lindsey Graham is the one raising that question because he's worried that Joe Biden is not going to be enough of a warmonger.
Track. Most Democrats are worried about Biden winning the election. I'm worried about Biden being the commander-in-chief for the next 4 months. We're having a meeting with NATO in Washington next week. On October the 7th, Israel's attacked by Hamas. On October the 8th, President Biden gives an interview to the special counsel where they determined him to be a nice man with a bad memory and you couldn't convince a jury he did anything wrong. I want those tapes released. So what I'd like to see,
which I suppose would be Biden's defense if ever he were tried for war crimes for supporting Israel's ensuing mass murder campaign. He's an elderly man who can't be convicted by a jury because he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
is President Biden take a cognitive test. I think everybody going forward in the line of succession
should
have
former
a
President Trump take one as well?
On a regular basis. Yes. I think all nominees for president going to the future should have neurological exams as part of an overall physical exam. I think people in the line of succession should have a neurological exam. My predecessor.
All right. So again, the issue here, Lindsey Graham, one of the most unhinged people who's ever worked in U.S. politics, he's now the one raising concerns about Biden's fitness to be commander in chief. If there are people on the left in Congress who cared about, the state of the world, they would be raising this issue too, because we do have a cognitively impaired president presiding over the world's top nuclear arsenal. But again, Democrats are not concerned about that. They're not concerned about the future of the planet. They're only concerned about their political future in the short term. So therefore, it's left to Lindsey Graham to raise this issue. And his concern is only that Biden won't be enough of a warmonger.
Right. They're in lockstep. Graham and Biden are in lockstep on Ukraine, which is, Graham's pet issue. Although Graham wants, even more funding and quicker.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Ukraine, there is a NATO meeting happening in Washington this week. Once again, Ukraine will not be offered NATO membership because, as is now being made very clear, the so-called open door to Ukraine by NATO has really just been a back door to fight Russia. So by promising Ukraine future membership, you can integrate Ukraine de facto into NATO without the obligation to defend it when inevitably that sparks a fight with Russia, as William Burns, the director of the CIA, predicted a long time ago in a cable released by WikiLeaks. So Ukraine's getting the worst of all worlds, a war with Russia, but no membership in NATO. And that basically is happening as we speak. And that's going to be the message at the NATO summit this week. So what NATO has to do is pretend that they're offering Ukraine something while still giving them absolutely nothing, except just simply the right to sacrifice themselves for the U.S.'s real goal, which is bleeding Russia. So
yeah, Ukraine is basically like the fourth Ghostbuster. I mean, he's part of it, but is he really? Winston Zeddemore. Zelensky on top of a tower in Kyiv. I love this town.
Sad. All right, let's hear from Jens Stoltenberg.
Of America's closest European allies will be coming to Washington this week for the annual NATO summit. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is here. Good morning, Secretary General. Great to have you here at the table. Let me read you a headline from the Wall Street Journal. Quote, "The world saw President Biden deteriorating. Democrats ignored warnings. European leaders and officials expressed worries about his focus and stamina." You're meeting with NATO leaders this week in Washington. You're close with President Biden and many other NATO leaders. What's your real take on the private assessment of the President of the United States among NATO leaders?
I'm absolutely confident that when all NATO leaders convene here this week, it will be a great summit. We will celebrate the 75th anniversary of the most successful alliance in history. And I just met President Biden.
Yes, the most successful alliance in history, as seen in Libya, where they now have slave markets, country destroyed, Serbia, and a now disastrous proxy war unfolding in Europe. Because
I'm sorry, Jay-Z and Kanye West is the most successful alliance in history.
In the Oval Office a couple of weeks ago, and that was a good and productive meeting where we prepared all the important decisions we'll make here on defense, on support for Ukraine, and not least on burden sharing that European allies are now really stepping up and spending record amount of money on defense, and of course also on China and how we need to work together. So this is a substance of the summit, and of course these decisions would not have been possible to make without a strong US leadership.
Again, we're supposed to celebrate that NATO is yielding the most spending ever on so-called defense, which just simply means the military-industrial complex. That is their top success. That's what they exist to do. And of course, that talking point is never questioned on these networks. Okay, a little bit more of Jens Stoltenberg.
There's no question. The substance is what matters. But we just heard from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a Republican who's close to the Republican nominee. He's saying he has concerns that world leaders don't trust President Biden to be in command of the job. You speak privately with these people. What's the truth here? Are there concerns or not among NATO leaders?
But if I started to comment on issues like that, then suddenly NATO, I will be part of domestic debate.
Well, it'd be easy to just say no, or yes.
But I think it's important for NATO to stay out of that kind of domestic discussions. They are, of course, important in the United States, but NATO should not be part of it. What matters for NATO is the decisions what to do together. And just, for instance, on defense spending, which has been a big issue for the United States for many years under different presidents. When we made a pledge 10 years ago to increase defense spending, only 3 allies spent 2% of GDP on defense. This year it's 23 allies, an increase just this year of 18% across Europe and Canada. So record high investments by European allies.
I understand you want to focus.
I understand you want to celebrate that spending on the military and industrial complex is at a record high, but what about the fact that the president, the head of the alliance, cannot function properly? Can you give us an answer on that? Which, of course, he can't.
Yeah.
Focus on that. But you've just been with President Biden, as you said, in the Oval Office. What's your personal assessment? Is he someone you can work with in an effective way on the policy issues?
We had a productive meeting, and of course there is no way to make these big decisions on how to further strengthen NATO, enlarge NATO, new members, without having a strong US leadership.
Why such a long timeline to bring in Ukraine? You've talked about a 10-year window. Why is it 10 years versus maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years since they're facing war?
Well, no one has said.
The answer is because they wanted to use the prospect of future NATO membership to integrate Ukraine into NATO's military infrastructure, which they've done. And on this show, we've covered the fact that it only recently got admitted that the CIA has built up bases inside of Ukraine since the coup of 2014. So under the guise of giving Ukraine this membership far in the distance, that allows NATO to integrate Ukraine as a proxy without the obligation to defend it if it gets into a war with Russia, which was the goal, to use Ukraine as bait to bleed Russia. And to bait Ukraine, they dangled the prospect of future membership. It's the perfect scam for people whose goal is to bleed Russia and possibly overthrow Vladimir Putin. That's what their goal was. And of course, now it's having its predictable result, where Ukraine is being decimated and has lost 1/5 of its territory, which Jens Stoltenberg, of course, does not care about. But that's the answer to that question. And just to reinforce the insult to Ukraine, let's show this headline from the Telegraph of London ahead of the summit. This is what Ukraine's being told. Ukraine to be told it's too corrupt to join NATO. So this is what Ukraine gets for going along with this scam of future NATO membership, is being told it's too corrupt. Sorry, we're going to use you. We're going to not negotiate with Russia. We're going to refuse to discuss the prospect of Ukraine's NATO membership. And then after the damage is done, after hundreds of thousands of people have died, we're going to turn around and tell Ukraine, sorry, you're too corrupt. And by the way, who's telling Ukraine's too corrupt? It's President Biden, whose son got a lucrative energy board seat in Ukraine shortly after his father, Joe Biden, helped overthrow the government there. So Joe Biden's now lecturing Ukraine about corruption after using Ukraine for his real goal of bleeding Russia, and using it to get, to the benefit of his son, who's now advising Joe Biden to stay in office, even though he can't function.
I have no one-liners. This NATO shit is just wild.
All right, let's turn briefly to Gaza. Daniel, this is a topic you've been covering extensively on your podcast, which you co-host with Matt Lieb, Bad Hasbara. And let's watch a brief clip marking the 9-month anniversary of October 7th, and therefore 9 months of Israeli mass murder in Gaza. This is from Face the Nation.
Today marks the 9-month anniversary since Hamas attacked Israel and murdered nearly 1,200 people.
Okay, that's all we need to see.
Nope.
That's all we need to see, because
they did not.
That's
they did not murder. They did not murder 1,200 people. Has this guy read Haaretz recently?
Yeah, well, exactly. So that's the standard talking point that we've gotten ad nauseum every day since October 7th, that Hamas murdered. It was even initially higher, the figure, but it's been revised lower. Murdered nearly 1,200 people. They don't distinguish in that figure between civilians and combatants. But it turns out, as has been said on this show many times before from the start, on your show too, Daniel, that actually Hamas did not murder nearly 1,200 people. That actually Israel murdered some of its own people when it deployed something called the Hannibal directive, which basically is an Israeli doctrine that says we're not going to allow the taking of captives and hostages. And so therefore, Israel opened fire on the Hamas militants and their vehicles crossing back into Gaza. And the process killed a lot of Israelis. Now, to get that information, you would have to go to outlets like the Electronic Intifada, which is the first U.S. outlet to report this. Then the Gray Zone did this as well. We've talked about this extensively on Useful Idiots, also on your podcast as well, Bad Hasbara.
And if I could just say, a guest on my podcast and another guest on your podcast are excellent resources. So you had Alon Mizrahi on, just an excellent commentator, and he has an excellent Twitter thread, or a long post actually recently, talking about the implications of this Hannibal directive. And we had David Sheen from the Electronic Intifada on, talking about, after a long discussion of Meir Kahane, we also at the very end talked about the reporting he did about the Israeli colonel or general who ordered this literal kill zone between the kibbutzim and the Gaza border. Anything that moved, Israeli or Palestinian, was to be eliminated.
So these facts are basically censored from the U.S. corporate media. You can't acknowledge them. If you do, you get smeared as a conspiracy theorist, which is what has happened to the Gray Zone and Electronic Intifada, which has been the subject of multiple hit pieces in Western media, including, ironically, in Haaretz, which is an Israeli paper. But Haaretz just admitted the truth, the same truth that it's been attacking the Gray Zone and Electronic Intifada for reporting, which is this. Let's look at the headline. IDF, the Israeli army, ordered Hannibal directive on October 7th to stop Hamas taking soldiers captive. And someone who has been reporting this from the start is Ali Abunimah of the Electronic Intifada. So let's just look quickly at a thread that he wrote summarizing the main findings of this Haaretz report, because Haaretz, this Israeli paper, is acknowledging what's been known for a long time, but basically kept off limits to Western audiences. And again, Haaretz was attacking people like Ali and Max Blumenthal for reporting this, but now, 9 months later, after tens of thousands of people have been slaughtered by Israel, now finally Haaretz is acknowledging some of the truth, and this is what some of what Haaretz reported. So let's go to Ali's thread.
I really want to do it in Ali's voice, but I'm not going to do it.
I'm sure you do a great impression.
On 7th of October.
Pretty good. Israeli forces were ordered to fire at every single vehicle moving toward Gaza. There's no doubt the Zionists deliberately murdered large numbers of their own people that day. Okay. Next tweet. Very early on 7th of October, the Zionist High Command began ordering its forces to kill its own soldiers who were under attack by the resistance. That was their first response. What must it be like to be a citizen of a state whose first response is to murder you if you get captured?
Yeah, Alon's tweet really answered that question in devastating detail.
As Palestinian resistance fighters overran the Eretz military base early on October 7th, the IDF ordered its soldiers to attack their own side to finish off the defeated and humiliated Israelis. Okay. It was hours into the October 7th resistance military action that Israel ordered its forces to fire at any and every vehicle moving towards Gaza, knowing fully they carried captured Israelis. And there's a source in Israel's Southern Command that says to Haaretz, everyone knew by then that such vehicles could be carrying kidnapped civilians or soldiers. So Israel knew exactly who it was firing at, its own people, but proceeded because the imperative of preventing Hamas from taking captives, from taking hostages who could be used to negotiate a captive exchange, because there are thousands of Palestinian hostages in Israeli prisons, that superseded Israeli concern for its own people's lives.
Yeah,
Israel
they could be used as tools of diplomacy.
Israel deliberately turned the area near the Gaza boundary on October 7th into a killing zone, knowing and intending that its own soldiers and settlers would be killed by its Apaches and mortars, rather than allow them to be taken alive and later exchanged for Palestinian hostages. That's Ali Abunimah making the same point. And again, a source from in Haaretz from Israel's Southern Command says the instruction was meant to turn the area around the border fence into a killing zone, closing it off toward the west. So that's Haaretz, an Israeli paper, confirming what we've said from the start, that Israel turned the area that was attacked on October 7th by Hamas fighters into a killing zone. And that killing zone included not just Hamas militants, but Israel's own people.
And didn't Haaretz report this in Hebrew quite a while ago?
Haaretz had some details on this a while ago, but I have not. But this source speaking out, that's for the first time.
Well, I got to say, I hate the name of this directive. I hate it because it ruins the A-team for me, you know. And I got to credit Bad Hasbara producer Adam Levin for this one, but I love it when a plan to murder my own civilians comes together.
Pretty good. All right, we're gonna have to leave it on that note. Daniel, thank you so much for doing this. This is a lot of fun to do. Maté morning, Monday morning with you. Anything you want to plug for us before we go?
Remember we were little kids and we would like play with our Fisher Price radios and make fun of Israeli propaganda and talk about U.S. politics. Yeah, so just really to plug Bad Hasbara, our podcast. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on all your podcast apps. Patreon.com/Bad Hasbara. I don't think it gets you any perks, but it'll get you a perky feeling in your heart. Check out walkwithdaniel.com if you want to see another thing I do. That's it.
And to support this show, go to usefulidiots.podcast.com. Daniel, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Katie will be back next week. And for the main show, our regular Friday show and our Thursday Throwdown, we're taking that off this week. So there'll be no regular show this week, but we'll be back with everything next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to Monday Morning. We'll see you next time.